hearing on the Department of Defense perspectives on financial improvement and audit readiness efforts. We just heard from Representative Mike Conaway, the chairman of our Defense Financial Management and Auditability Reform Panel, who briefed the committee on the panel's findings and recommendations contained in the panel's final report. He's our subject matter expert, so I'll not restate what he just said. Unfortunately, our other subject matter expert, Rob Andrews, could not join us here today, but we're pleased to have our briefing be followed by today's hearing so that the committee might also receive the Department's perspectives on the report and its ongoing financial management reform efforts. I'd like to thank the Department's witnesses that are here today, as well as those who have testified in previous panel hearings. The Department's willingness to make time to testify in the many early morning hearings conducted by the panel is a testament to its commitment to achieving financial management reform. With that said, as pointed out in the panel's report, there's much work to be done for DOD to reach its financial improvement and audit readiness goals. But with the billions of dollars in budget cuts facing the Department and the need to have reliable information in order to make the tough decisions, DOD must take the necessary actions to overcome the challenges it faces. The committee stands ready to support DOD in this effort and is interested in receiving feedback on the panel's work to assist us in our oversight on this very important effort. We have with us here today the Honorable Robert F. Hale, Undersecretary of Defense, Comptroller of the Department, and the Honorable Elizabeth A. McGrath, Deputy Chief Management Officer of the Department of Defense. Let me conclude by saying two more things. Given the change in defense strategy recently announced by the President and the significant budget cuts the Department has to implement starting this year, all of us are anxious to learn more about the specific changes contained in the fiscal year 2013 budget request. We'll have that opportunity next month, but although we're joined today by Secretary Hale, I recognize that he's not at liberty to discuss these issues in advance of the President's release of the budget. Thank you again for joining us nevertheless. Lastly, following what must have been a difficult decision to resign from office, I want to wish our colleague, Representative Gabrielle Giffords, our very best in her recovery and make sure she knows that she'll be missed. She was a leader on this committee and a tireless advocate for our men and women in uniform. I know our last conversation in December during the what do we call that when the lame duck session at the end of the last Congress, a nightmare, yes. She came up to me on the floor and requested that as early as possible as a committee we visit Fort Huachuca in her district, which was very important to her. I'm sorry that we haven't made that trip yet, but I think it's something that we should schedule as a trip to one of the bases that we've been trying to do, and when we do, we should invite her if she's able to accompany us on that visit. I know leaving public service and the constituents she's worked so hard for cannot have been an easy decision. She'll continue to be in our thoughts and prayers as we move forward on our work in this committee. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate those comments, and I certainly want to echo them. Gabby will be very much missed from this Congress and particularly from this committee. She worked tirelessly, as we all know, on just about every conceivable issue that was before us and worked with many different members, Democrat and Republican alike, on the issues that were important to her district and the issues that were important to the country. I've had the opportunity to visit Fort Huachuca on a couple of occasions and Davis-Monthan Air Force Base as well, and they absolutely love her out there. They know that she is working hard on their behalf and has done a fabulous job representing that district in Arizona. I think the encouraging thing is how much her physical condition has improved over the course of the last year. And I think what she was mindful of is that this is a 2 to 3 year recovery period from this type of injury. She's going to continue to get better, but she needs to focus on that and focus on her health. And I think also the understanding was, there's a way to represent a district. It's the way she's represented it for her entire career, 100% and with just full-on energy. And if she couldn't do that, she didn't think it was fair to the people of her district to continue in that capacity, and I greatly admire that decision, even as I am very personally disappointed by it, because would love to have her back on this committee. But I think it's also important for everyone to remember what she said in that announcement, and has said since, This is an interruption, not an end. She wants to be back into public service in some capacity or another, focused on her health right now, but as she said more than once, she will be back, and we all look forward to her continuing in public service in any of a number of different possible capacities. Great serving with her. Who knows? Hopefully we may have that opportunity again at some point. And I thank the Chairman for his kind words and appreciate Gabby's service on this committee during her time in Congress. I had made opening remarks earlier about the auditing process. Don't have anything further to say on that. I look forward to our witnesses' testimony, and I thank the Chairman for holding this hearing and for his work on this important issue. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Hale.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for your interest in financial management at the Department of Defense, and we especially want to thank Chairman Conaway and his ranking associate, Congressman Andrews, and the members of the Defense Financial Management and Auditability Reform Panel for their support. And let me say, everybody in the Department of Defense will miss Congresswoman Giffords. She was an able supporter of the department, and we certainly wish her the best. Ms. McGrath and I submitted a statement for the record that contains our reaction to the panel's recent report. It also describes our overall approach to auditability. We'll now deliver a joint oral statement that summarizes the key points. Let me start with the panel report. Most importantly, we find the panel's report balanced and constructive. It recognizes the progress we've made in overcoming historic impediments to audit readiness, and we're pleased that the report endorses our financial improvement and audit readiness, or FIRE, strategy, which is to focus first on the information DOD most uses to manage the department, especially budgetary information and the counts and locations of our assets. The panel did identify 5 areas where action is still needed, and we'd like to comment briefly on each of those. First, the panel concluded that we need sustained leadership. We fully agree with that. Today, we have the support from the Secretary himself, from the Deputy Secretary, and from many other key leaders in the department. But while we have strong senior leader support now, we know this support must be sustained as leaders change. Our goal is to build up momentum so that this current FIRE effort will continue. And we're building that momentum by establishing a clear governance structure. We have that in place. Setting aside dedicated resources. We have in our future years defense plan money in each of the years in each of the departments and money to help the defense agencies. And identifying short-term and long-term goals, which we have done. We also expect and welcome congressional oversight, which should help to sustain momentum. A second factor identified by the panel involves the DOD financial management workforce. Our professionals are capably supporting key missions around the world. I'm very proud of them. They're in Afghanistan, they're in all the hot spots, as well as so many other places. But the business environment is changing, and we need to change our training to match. In the short term, we're achieving practical training in audit readiness by using independent public accountants who have great expertise in this area. For the longer term, we're implementing a course-based certification program to ensure that financial managers have the skill and experience in key areas, including financial statement audits. We appreciate congressional support for this program and the Fiscal Year 12 Authorization Act. You provide us legal authority to put it in place. And we're working aggressively to get the certification program started. I had a briefing on it yesterday. We expect to have pilots in place by the end of the calendar year. The third factor identified by the panel involves enterprise resource planning systems. This is a key area, and let me ask my colleague, Ms. McGrath, to address this important topic.
Mr. Chairman, other members of the committee, I too appreciate the opportunity to discuss the panel's report with you today and echo Mr. Hale's heartfelt thanks to Congressman Conaway and Mr. Andrews for their focused attention to this important topic. As the panel report notes, effective implementation of enterprise resource planning, or ERP systems, will not enable auditability by itself, but it will help to achieve the modern business environment needed to meet and sustain our goal of audit readiness. Both the panel and GIO have recognized the Department has to improve the way we acquire and has improved the way we acquire and implement ERPs over the past 2 years. That said, they also believe that we can and need to do even better. The Department agrees. We also agree with the panel that it's important to closely link our ERP efforts to audit readiness. To this end, we are employing a number of tools to establish and maintain the linkage. For example, we are tying business outcomes, including auditability, to acquisition milestones and requiring individual programs to define what specific role they play in achieving those business outcomes. We have done this recently with both the Army and Navy's financial systems, the General Fund Enterprise Business System, and the Navy Enterprise Resource Planning System, and the Army's logistics system, the Global Combat Support System. We also share the same view as the panel with regard to the importance of overcoming challenges in acquiring ERPs, specifically in requirements definition and testing. To this end, we issued streamlined policy for the acquisition of business IT systems that emphasized rigorous analysis of capability gaps, summarizing them as a problem statement, focusing also on incremental delivery of capability in 18 to 24 months, and using a business case and a program charter to streamline documentation. Additionally, to help better define and stabilize requirements for our acquisition programs, we are driving better application of business process reengineering, especially as a precursor to the acquisition of a business system or capability. We are grateful that the panel's report emphasizes one of our toughest challenges, dealing with the problems inherent in implementing ERPs in a legacy environment. The report rightly cites the difficulties associated with data conversion. Complications arise when the quality of the legacy data is not equal to what is required by a modern ERP system, and the need in some cases is to institute multiple interfaces to legacy systems. Our goal is to eliminate, significantly reduce, and/or eliminate as many interfaces as possible. Where we are working aggressively to sunset our legacy systems wherever and whenever appropriate. The Navy ERP is a great example of how the implementation of our ERP can lead to the retirement of legacy systems. The system is an integrated business management, provides an integrated business management capability that modernizes, streamlines, and standardizes how the Navy manages people, programs, money, equipment, and supplies. It has enabled inventory reduction, real-time visibility of assets, resources, and inventory, and improved financial controls. It has approximately 66,000 users worldwide, managing approximately $62 billion. And it also has enabled the retirement of 27 legacy systems to date, with 69 more scheduled to be retired by 2016. Furthermore, we appreciate Congress's recent change to our Business Systems Investment Review Board process, specifically Section 901 of the FY12 National Defense Authorization Act, which enables visibility of the entire business portfolio, not just the modernization efforts. This will greatly assist our efforts to rationalize the legacy environment. In closing, I thank the panel for its work and carefully considered recommendations. I also like to thank the committee for its continued attention to both auditability and the DOD's broader business operations. This concludes my statement. I look forward to your questions.
Let me pick up with a couple other points, and then we'll get to all of your questions. And thank you, Beth. Important as they are, improved financial systems by themselves aren't going to get us to auditable financial statements. We also need improved financial controls, reporting controls, and that's a fourth concern expressed by the panel. Controls are a key to audit success, but sometimes we find that ours are inadequate, sometimes they're too variable across commands, or they're not adequately documented. To address this problem, the services are enlisting help from their service audit agencies, their internal auditors. The audit agencies have people who are qualified to assess management controls and make sound recommendations. We also need the support of field commanders who can ensure that management control improvements actually occur, and we are seeking that support. Better internal control should help with improper payments. Our improper payment rates are actually lower than most civilian agencies when measured as a share of our budget, even though those agencies have clean opinions. But we need to do more, and we are taking steps to lower improper payments even further. The same is true for unmatched disbursements and Anti-Deficiency Act violations. And fifth on the panel's list, we're taking actions to institutionalize these various improvements and to raise awareness of the audit efforts in non-financial areas. We have a strategic management plan that clearly incorporates this initiative. The Secretary's directive on auditability, issued last October, certainly helped raise awareness. It has also created new goals for us. The Secretary wants us to cut in half the time that we will spend getting our budget statement ready, the Statement of Budgetary Resources for General Funds. Specifically, he wants that statement to be audit ready by 2014, and he wants us to take other steps to increase audit readiness. We're carrying out Secretary Panetta's direction. An overview of our accelerated plan was submitted to the Secretary in December, and he approved it. We are now developing the details where needed to ensure that we can execute the new plan and that we have a way to hold people accountable. We'll be prepared to brief your staffs in March on the details and will provide more comprehensive information in the May version of the fire report. Let me conclude by addressing our overall audit efforts. Our goal is to have all DOD financial statements audit ready by 2017. The key to achieving our 2017 goal is building a foundation. To do that, we need to carry out things we're doing right now, our current priorities, achieve auditable budget statements, and counts and locations of assets. That foundation will greatly help us as we work toward asset valuation, which is the other major step that we have to carry out by 2017. We also need to sustain effort in this area, and in that regard, there's one area where we could use your help. In the past year, we've had no fewer than 4 threats of a government shutdown that required enormous planning efforts. We were on a 6-month continuing resolution, also required a great deal of management attention. Now the prospect of sequester is hanging over us. This uncertainty has drained valuable time and leadership attention from many initiatives, including our commitment to audit readiness. Congress could help us a great deal by returning to a more orderly budget process. Especially with regard to business processes, the Department of Defense is, if you will, more like an aircraft carrier than a speedboat. It doesn't change quickly. But we're building a foundation for auditability, and we have created considerable momentum. And aircraft carriers, once you get them started, also don't stop quickly. Because we're building a foundation and creating momentum, I'm reasonably confident that we can meet our goal to have all DOD financial statements audit ready by 2017. Mr. Chairman, let me end as I started by expressing appreciation for the committee's interest in this topic and appreciation for the panel's suggestion and its recognition of our progress. That concludes our statement. We'd welcome your questions.
Thank you very much for your report and for your testimony. I know you can't go into specifics of the upcoming budget request, but one of the critical factors for success in meeting your financial management and audit reform goals will be the availability of resources. Do you have confidence that the fiscal year 2013 budget request will continue to provide resources required to meet your accelerated audit readiness goals? I know you just mentioned things that we could do to help, like returning to regular order. Some of our members may be wearing buttons today listing 1,000 days since the Senate has passed a budget. It makes it very difficult to return to regular order when we pass the budget on our side, but are not able to get the Senate to function properly under regular order. So maybe it would be good if you get the opportunity to testify over there. You can make the same request of them. I know we will be striving to get our budget passed and do it through regular order on our side here, and hopefully we'll be able to get that done. I know we were told that the Secretary, they were going to give us the budget, and they've had to move it back for a week, but we've been able to adjust our schedule to keep on schedule to get our work done. We will try to do your request. I know a lot of people think that this will be a pretty much political year, and we'll probably end up the year in another continuing resolution. It's unfortunate. I hope that's not the case. And I hope we are able to return to regular order, and we'll be trying. If we could get all the Congress to function the way our committee does, that would be a big step forward. Anyway, if you can think of anything that we could do that we're not doing in regard to specific amounts that you need to make sure that you have the resources you need, be happy to hear them. Do you have any specifics other than what you've already mentioned to us?
Mr. Chairman, I think we're going to be okay on resources. I'll not go into specifics. It helps to have Secretary Panetta's support. Probably doesn't hurt to have the comptroller's support. So I think we're going to be okay in terms of the budget resources. It's not on my worry list. Sustained leadership is, but that is not. So I think we're okay.
Very good. Thank you. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I want to point up something you said near the end of your testimony, and that is the 4 times when you were uncertain exactly how the money was going to be coming to you this year, the 4 threats of a government shutdown. I don't think there's a proper understanding in this body or even nationally the devastating impact that has on the ability of the government, certainly DOD, having such a large budget, and that's the one that I'm most intimately familiar with. I remember meeting with folks over at the Pentagon as they were trying to figure out what they were going to do, which programs they could continue, where they could find the money to continue them, which ones were going to have to be suspended. And I know out there in the private contractor world, they didn't know. They didn't hire people. They had a program. They knew it was supposed to be funded, but then maybe it wasn't going to be funded. So they had to ramp up. They were planning on hiring people to get ready to do this, but they didn't know if it was going to happen, so they couldn't hire them. It is devastating when this body is unable to pass the normal appropriations and authorizing bills in some sort of regular order. We tend to think here in the last couple of years that that's just what happens. We can't get an agreement, so we do a CR, and then maybe the CR leads to a threatened shutdown, and well, that's just the way things go. It is horrific in terms of its impact upon the ability of the government to do its job. And again, not just DOD. And while we're out there wrestling with constituents who are deeply dissatisfied with government and its ability to do its job, by whatever definition they have, understand that we're just crippling that by not being able to give the departments, all of the departments, some predictability about when they're going to get their money, whatever that amount of money is. So I just wanted to place an extra little exclamation point on that. And, I know this committee, we passed our bill in May, waited for 6 months for the Senate to pass it. So I will say I think this committee did its job, but collectively as Congress we need to do our job to enable you to do this. And then I just have 2 questions. One, to sort of frame this, I mean, it's been said in the press that, the Pentagon doesn't know where it's spending its money because it can't audit properly. I think a lot of people don't know what that means in sort of concrete terms. What is it that the Pentagon is unable to do, and how does that translate into the notion of knowing where you spend your money? Could you explain that a little bit in terms of just where the problem is at, sort of what it is and what it isn't?
Well, I'll try. First off...
And if you I'm sorry, the microphone's sort of off to your side there. If you could get that over, that's great.
Better?
Yes.
I will try. First off, I am fully committed to auditable statements for a variety of reasons, but the most important reason is we need to reassure the public and the Congress that we're good stewards of their funds and will never do it unless we can pass an audit. So I have committed a lot of effort to that. That said, I believe that when it comes to knowing where we spend our money by appropriation, the way you appropriate it to us, we do have accurate information. Our systems are designed to do that. They do it pretty well. And I would offer as corroboration the absence of problems. We do about 140 million accounting transactions a year in DOD. If we were off even by 1%, that would be more than 1 million incorrect transactions. You would see regular mispayments to contractors, and we have a few, but not many. You'd see regular mispayments to people. Our improper payments to personnel are a couple tenths of a %, and they usually go away quickly. You'd see unmatched disbursements in a wholesale basis. We're not seeing any of that. So I'm confident that the data is reasonably accurate, but we need to demonstrate that through an audit, and I'm fully committed to doing it.
In layman's terms, then, and I'm not an accountant, what does it mean that you can't do an audit?
Well, let me try that. I do that with some humility with Mr. Conaway here as a CPA because I'm not. But basically, an auditor wants to see for every entry in your budget statement, and let me focus on that. They want to see an invoice. They want to see a receiving report that said you got the goods. They want to see a contract that matches the price in the invoice. And we do, with 140 million transactions a year, we can't quickly generate all that documentation in a manner that satisfies auditors. One of the big things the enterprise resource planning systems will do for us is keep that information, particularly the receiving reports and the invoices, in a manner that's electronically accessible. Right now you have to go out to the bases, in some cases they prowl through your files, find that invoice, and there are thousands of them when they sample. We can't do it quickly enough. We can't balance at a transaction level with our Treasury account, the so-called funds balance with Treasury, which is required, and we should be able to do it. So we can't reassure you, and we need to do that. But the absence of fundamental problems, it leaves me convinced that the basic data we are presenting to you when we show you the budget in a couple of weeks are accurate.
Okay. Thank you. I had another question, but I'll hold off on that and yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bartlett.
That's testimony to our inability to adequately communicate with our constituents. The average constituent believes that if we just didn't have any earmarks, and now we don't, that if we cut out foreign aid and if we cut out waste, fraud, and abuse, we probably could have balanced the budget. I'm not sure we're going to cut out foreign aid, but they'd certainly like us to cut out waste, fraud, and abuse. And they have the perception that unless we can audit what we're doing, there's little chance that we're going to be able to cut out waste, fraud, and abuse. Can you, in a couple of minutes here, so that we have a statement for the record, tell our constituents why it's so difficult for DOD to keep records that can be auditable? And then could you provide us a little one-pager that we can send to our constituents who wonder why half of the money in our discretionary spending cannot be audited?
Well, Mr. Bartlett, I'll offer you an answer, but not an excuse. We need to do this, and we need to move to do it quickly. The reason is, at least partly goes to the answer I just gave Mr. Smith. We don't have systems in place right now that allow us to quickly get the information that an auditor requires. As I said, they want an invoice, they want a receiving report, they want a contract. With 140 million transactions a year and maybe 10, 20,000 sampled transaction by an auditor, you have to have that in an automated form because they want it in a couple of weeks, and we don't have that right now. We also don't have internal controls that are adequate. I'll give you a couple examples to try to make that a little more clear. We went to some of our bases when the Marine Corps had its budgetary statement under audit, and the auditors found that we had not taken off people who had left the base. We had not taken them off access to our financial systems. They said, wait a minute, I mean, that's a fraud potential. That's pretty easy blocking and tackling, but we got to get it done across the department. We also do something called bulk obligations of military personnel dollars. We obligate them broadly for, say, a whole command. This is efficient for us, saves us time. The auditors don't find that acceptable. They want to be able to track it back to the individual and be sure, you know, Sergeant Bob Hale really is a sergeant and is getting paid properly. So we have to change our business practices to avoid bulk obligations or at least have the detail that they want. Translating that for the American people will take a shot, but it's pretty technical stuff. It's just we got to get it done, and we need to reassure you and the public that we're good stewards. And as I said before, I don't think we'll ever do that unless we can pass what every viable company in America has to do and pass an audit. If I had time, I'll tell you a brief story. It was in 1994. I'd taken over as the Air Force financial manager, and I was trying to do audit then. I didn't get too far. My wife, I was talking to my wife about why our statements weren't auditable. At first, I was not an accountant, so I had to try to explain what audit meant, and I did that. And then she stopped me and she said, "Well, Bob, if your statements aren't auditable, how do you know people aren't stealing from you?" Financial statement audits aren't really designed to detect fraud. That's not what they're designed to do. But I started to explain that, and I just stopped and realized we aren't ever going to convince the American public we're good stewards until we do this. So we're trying. And I'd like to be getting there faster, but I think we have made a fair amount of progress. I'll try for the one-pager.
Can you give us a little one-pager in layman's language that they'll understand of why it's so difficult?
I'll try.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mrs. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just ask you to follow up really on the question that I asked Mr. Conaway about how you move this in a way that the need for auditability becomes part of the culture in a way that and you mentioned the evaluations, and that's part of the report that they put forward and how important that is to senior leadership and what goes down the line. But, I mean, how do you tell people that this is really going to change? And I guess the other question that I have to ask myself is, was this not in place before? What's changing?
Well, let me go to your first question. How do you do it? Tone at the top really helps. Secretary Panetta's endorsement of this has been of enormous advantage. I view it as a golden opportunity. I'm looking how I can leverage that, and I think he's convinced that this is important, and that has beginning to circulate through the system. We need to get this from being a comptroller issue to a commander's issue. It's the commanders that can make these changes that have to happen. I think that's starting to happen, but we haven't gotten there yet. We're doing a meeting, I hope, this afternoon with the Deputies Management Action Group. We'll have all the vice chiefs there, and one of the questions we're going to ask them is how do we do better at getting this to be a commander's issue? As you heard Mr. Conaway say, we have asked that the performance plans for every member of the senior executive service who has any significant involvement with audit, their performance plans specify that this is one of the things they have to do. That ties to bonuses, and so it's a right step in the right direction. We have to do all of that and more. Why haven't we done it before? I just have to say the management attention has been variable. We haven't sustained it. And we're big and we're fighting wars and all the reasons or excuses that you hear, but we just have to sustain the attention and make this happen.
Do you see a role for the Personnel Committee, as Mr. Conaway stated, to make certain that there is an acknowledgement and participation by all those involved, all the stakeholders involved in this?
So as I've said to Mr. Conaway, political appointees don't usually ask for hearings. However, I think it's appropriate that there be ongoing hearings. I'll let you decide where that will be. I won't specify the organization, but I think it is appropriate to have some ongoing oversight, perhaps particularly during the change of administration, and no matter what happens in the election, there will be change in senior leaders. That's just inevitable. So I think it would be appropriate, perhaps particularly during that period, to have oversight hearings. And if you wanted to ask in your personnel role whether the members of the senior executive service at each department have this in there, I would welcome that. I think you will hear yes, because we work carefully with the departments, but I think it would be a good question to ask.
Ms. McGrath, did you have anything you'd like to add?
So I would echo Mr. Hale's comments about this has to come outside of just the comptroller community, and so we have embedded every functional area into the governance process at the Financial Improvement Audit Readiness. That it is more than just he and I at the table and the accountants, it's everybody. We are cascading those into the performance plans, holding those members accountable. And we're also tying, as I mentioned in my statement, the implementation of the various systems. So these are logisticians now paying attention to audit as part of an acquisition decision. What business outcomes are we trying to achieve, not only the logistics aspects, but also the audit piece, so they are not separate. So I think we are taking a much more integrated approach to achieving collective business outcomes as opposed to specific functional outcomes. And I think all of that has been very helpful.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Conaway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hale and Ms. McGrath, on the Panetta's 60-day review of the 2014 Statement of Budgetary Resources Acceleration, can you give us kind of where we are right now? We're a little more than 90 days past that deal. Can you give us some sense of where that's going?
I can. First off, procedurally, we gave the Secretary 2 days before it was due a summary of the plan. He's approved it. We're now moving and well along with getting details, dates, and who's responsible. Some of that will get reviewed at what I hope will be this meeting this afternoon with our Chief Management Officer, Dr. Carter, and Ms. McGrath and I will be there for that. But let me try to be helpful in general, and at some point we need to share more details with you. I understand that. Let me try to be helpful and try to tell you where we are kind of by department. The Marine Corps is in the best shape. Their Statement of Budgetary Resources is actually under audit, and I've got my fingers crossed for a positive opinion. We'll know by March, but we've learned a lot, and they're clearly a lot better off. Your 8,400 analogy you used in terms of hours, I think, is characteristic. So they're furthest ahead. I'm not too worried about them. The Naval Service is in pretty good shape. They had intended to assert audit readiness on the Statement of Budgetary Resources by 2014. They just have to do it. I don't want to understate the importance of that. The Army will have to speed up by about a year compared to their previous plan. They'll need to be sure their GFEB system, it's their ERP, is in place, and they're going to have to accelerate some of their data cleaning efforts. Some of the older data that they had hoped would just sort of go away with time by 2017 won't by 2014. The Air Force faces the biggest challenge of the military departments because it was depending on the DEAMS system, and which they'd hoped to have there by 2017 is not going to be there in large part by 2014. They're going to have to look at workarounds and maybe higher sample sizes or other approaches for some of their existing systems for a year or two. I don't mind that so long as we've got a long-term plan to get off that. I don't want to do that on a permanent basis. The defense agencies, only 3 of I think it's 26 defense agencies have clean audit opinions. We've got a big job there. They're smaller, so each one's not a problem. It's their number that's an issue. And I think they're challenging because of their number. We've set up a small group in my office to try to help them, and we've set aside some money in this forthcoming budget to act as seed money to help them move ahead, ask them to assert a readiness for what's called appropriations received, their funds distribution by next March, and audit readiness by 2014. We need our service providers like DFAS to be ready, and our principal staff assistants like me to work with their defense agencies to make sure that they're moving ahead. So that's probably more detail than you want, but I mean, we're getting there in terms of this plan.
Part of Secretary Panetta's charge was for the Deputy Secretary of Defense to set up a periodic review process on this issue so that we keep that sustained leadership emphasis on it. Has Deputy had a chance to put something in place yet?
He has. He'll use this Deputies Management Action Group, which is all the undersecretaries, the vice chiefs, the principal staff, the undersecretaries from OSD are all represented on this group. And basically what Ash Carter has said to me is, you know, Bob, tell me when you have something ready for me. And so we have a meeting this afternoon that will go over the plan for acceleration, and also we're going to use that opportunity when we have all the vice chiefs there to say, how do we get this out in the field? How do I get commanders involved? I think they're starting to do that, but I'd like their advice. And basically, Dr. Carter has said, come back to me when you're ready for another meeting, when you have something meaningful. He didn't want to schedule it every 2 months, and I think that's right. It's my job to tell him when we're ready to go. So yes, I think there is a process in place. Beth, you want to add to that?
I would just echo Mr. Hales. I mean, as was mentioned in our written statement, the financial auditability remains a priority for the department. We have cascading governance throughout the organization so that there is an appropriate level of accountability. And I think Ms. Davis asked earlier what was missing or what's different. I think that that's a big factor.
Well, thank you both again for testifying. Let me make one comment. We probably ought to modify the unauditable phrase by saying it's unauditable at rational costs. You could unleash enough auditors to redo every transaction, all 140 million transactions, and you could get an audit. That's not rational to do that. So we may ought to make sure people understand that unauditable means you can't audit it at a cost to the system that makes sense. So with those comments, I yield back.
Mr. Kissel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Hill, good to see you again. I remember when we traveled together before, you made a statement, I think it was something like, you're not happy until everybody else is unhappy. Was that correct?
Yes, that's one of the mottos of the conference. We're not happy or you're not happy. Right?
So are we making progress towards making you happy?
Yes, I think so. I'm not quite sure where you're going, but I think we've got the department headed in the right direction on this, and I'm pleased, but I recognize we've got a long way to go, and so I'm also humble, and I really like to under-promise and over-deliver for a change. We've been doing the opposite for 17 years, over-promising and under-delivering, and we need to deliver.
I do want to follow up more specifically with, you talked about sustained leadership as being important to all this, and this may have been discussed earlier and I missed it, but what area are you talking about that we need that sustained leadership, and how do you see that is working?
Well, it would be very helpful if, I'm not predicting when Secretary Panetta will leave, but whenever he does, if the next Secretary of Defense shared his commitment to this. But it's critical that it also be shared by the service secretaries and chiefs. They've got a lot of the effort to do, by the comptroller and my job, by the DCMO. I mean, frankly, most comptrollers are budget junkies. I am too. We focus a lot on budgets. We have to. That's part of our job, and it can push out everything else because it can be so all-consuming. You know, we need for the person who follows me whenever that happens to make sure they're still committed to pushing this process along toward auditability. So it's sustained leadership at the top, as well as getting our career people involved. But we need that sustained leadership has got to come from the top.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Kaufman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, refresh me, what year, again, is the goal to be able to have auditable books for the Department of Defense?
It's audit ready, which means we're ready to actually hire an auditor going there by 2017 for everything. Okay. 2014 for the highest priority, what I would say is highest priority, the Statement of Budgetary Resources for General Funds.
Okay. Now, you said this is pretty complicated in that, you know, all these different echelons of command, we're not able to match our invoices up with our expenditures. Is that a correct statement?
Yes, I mean, each one isn't complicated, pretty straightforward. The problem is the numbers and the nature of the processes that we have that don't make it easy.
You know, let me tell you what isn't complicated, and what I think that unless the culture of the Department of Defense changes, that I think it's going to be very difficult to get auditable records. And here's I think the fundamental problem, and that is that that commanders don't feel the responsibility. That in different echelons of command, there are always inspections that come down, and the commanders are held accountable, even though the staff person may have a military occupational specialty, whether a logistician or some other field, where, let's say, it's an infantry commander. In that instance, they're held accountable. But in financial management, there's not that kind of inspection where the military commanders at the respective commands are held accountable. And so I think what we needed to do is change the culture of the Department of Defense to make military commanders at every echelon of command vested in financial management. So somewhere in professional military education, there's going to have to be some aspect to where they have knowledge of this. To where they are accountable, to where if they have folks that aren't keeping track, that aren't able to pass an inspection, that they don't think are going to be able to pass an inspection, prior to that, relieving them and getting competent people in there. And so until we change the culture in the Department of Defense and have military commanders at every echelon vested in financial management, I believe this problem is going to continue, and I'd love both of you, I'd like your response to that.
I agree with you fully. We recognize, I said earlier, we got to get this out of the comptroller community and into the commanders community. The comptroller should still be the source of information. What I would like to see is every commander say, all right, I've got a senior staff meeting.
Absolutely.
You know, what's the problem here? And comptroller, what have I got to do?
Right.
And then it's their job to say, okay, you know, we got to fix the internal controls, which is the main thing they got to do. We need to support the installation of these systems and other steps that they'll need to take. We're moving in the right direction. The fact that we've had several meetings now, it's not the first time that we've had a meeting with the vice chiefs. So I think we're moving in the right direction. I also don't think we're there yet. I think if you randomly pick commanders at bases and installations, they might have heard of it because of Secretary Panetta's statement, but I don't yet feel that widely they would feel responsible. We got to get there, and that's one of the things I'm going to ask this afternoon of our vice chiefs. How do I help do that, or how do you help me do that? I know they're out there talking about it because we are getting some feedback. Mr. Conaway had to leave, but he's had some personal contacts at a base where the commander mentioned this. So we're moving in the right direction, but we're not there yet. And I recognize that's a key thing that has to happen.
I would just echo Mr. Hale. On the civilian side, we have taken steps to put the auditability goal on the civilian side. We don't have the same mechanism on the military side, although we are, I'll say, educating and teaching the professional military comptrollers. Again, within the military comptroller community, the goal is to get it outside and more broadly aware and share the accountability across the military departments. That's why I said we're approaching this at every angle we possibly can, through the systems implementation, IT rationalization. If we take away the legacy environment, that will enable stronger controls because we'll create a more integrated environment. I think through all of these means and mechanisms we can help change the culture, but I think it will take all of them along with the sustained leadership that Mr. Hale and others here have mentioned.
No, I can tell you, having served in both the Army and the Marine Corps, if the Secretary of Defense said today that military commanders at every level will be accountable to the financial management of their organizations, I think that this situation would change almost overnight, where you would have military commanders all of a sudden studying how to understand the financials of their organization in terms of, as you mentioned, as was mentioned here today, tracking the money spent with the invoices paid.
And that is the intent with the more detailed in the fire report. It starts at high-level auditability goals and cascades down to the military departments, and then has to get down to the command level. For the department to achieve its auditability goals, it has to get down to the command level.
Okay. Well, let me just say we've not taken that step, and I will encourage the Secretary of Defense to do so. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Kritz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just so I understand, because I've been one of those folks who've been pushing as well for auditable reports, and in an earlier statement you said that your financial statements at this point are really accurate, that you feel very strongly about the information that's there. It's just not to the level to auditable. And of course my concern was that to get to auditable helps you know what you have, and in cases like when the Congress doesn't pass a budget and you have to go to a continuing resolution, helps in your planning. But from the statement you made earlier, maybe my thought was not as accurate as I thought it was. And so I'm asking, getting to the level of an auditable report accomplishes what?
Well, I'll reiterate what I said. I think the information we're going to supply you in a couple of weeks on the budget is accurate, and I won't go through that answer again, but it's because of the absence of major problems. But you get several advantages from auditable statements. First is the law, and I take that seriously, and I know you do. Second, we'll improve our business practices in ways that may make us better able to use resources. Right now, out of those 140 million transactions, some get lost to us, and the money does not get obligated and expires, and we can't make use of it. So it will help us make better use of resources. But I would come back, and we need better business practices to make sure that what I said is true, that things are accurate. But I'll come back to the fundamental point. The reason we need to do this is to reassure the American public we're good stewards of their funds, and the Congress that we're good stewards of their funds. And that is valuable in and of itself, and I think the single biggest thing that we'll get out of auditable statements, in my view.
Okay. Well, and I look at it as a business model, and that's why I was trying to discern, are we going to spend $100 million to save $50 million? Is sort of, and that's what I'm trying to get to, is that, what are the personnel costs going to be to get to an auditable report? What is the time consumption, and the really, you talk about from the Secretary on down, the dedication that has to be to this effort. So, I believe wholeheartedly that we need these auditable reports, because you should be able to come to the Congress and the American people and say where you're spending the money and what you spent on it. But also from a planning standpoint, I thought it would be helpful, but especially when you have a CR where now you're starting to juggle things, and maybe I was misinterpreted that, and I'm happy to hear that you are very accurate at this
point. I think we could manage if we had to without it. We are managing. and we did do it for 6 months. It had problems quite apart from our lack of knowledge of where the dollars were. But that doesn't take away, in my view, from the importance of getting this done in order, again, to reassure the public.
But if I could add, I think it affords you the opportunity in a more real-time manner to have the information. You've heard a lot about the processes and the internal controls. Those are things that we work through to get to the accuracy of the data. With a more sound, controlled business environment, you actually then have an integrated capability to, in a more real-time fashion, get at the information that you're seeking. And so I do think that there's the real-time aspect that may or may not have a dollar value, but affords the opportunity for that planning that you're talking about. Good,
good. Now, from a personnel standpoint, what is the plan to either ramp up, redefine, re-educate people so that we're getting to this point? And I heard you tell the chairman that you have the finances you need to implement this plan. So could you just go through what's going to be happening at the, I guess, at the civilian side, what might be happening on the uniform side to make this happen?
Well, in the financial community, I think we need a course-based certification program analogous to the Defense Acquisition Workforce Improvement Act, the acquisition. What it allows us to do, we've got a lot of training, but what we don't have is a framework that allows senior leaders to say, okay, in a certain job, you need to have 3 or 4 courses and one of them in audit readiness, and that's not the only area where we need a better framework. But that framework will allow us to require that training. You gave us the legal authority to impose that framework, and we are moving to do that. In that process, audit readiness is a high priority for us. We're going to develop a short course base or an online course that indicates the importance of audit readiness, and at more senior levels will require more accounting knowledge so that people understand better the accounting system and what has to be done to be audit ready. So I think we're moving in the right direction in the financial community, both the military and civilian. This will apply equally to military and civilian. In the non-financial communities, they generally probably have the expertise. We need their attention, and we're trying to get that. And it may be that we want to provide maybe one of these online courses for an hour and why audit's important. I think I need to think about whether that would be a good idea and perhaps provide that to people who would be most involved. So training is an important part of this, and I think we are moving in the right direction.
Thank you. Mr. West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Ranking Member, and thanks for the panel members being here. I want to dovetail off what Mr. Kaufman kind of asked because it does cause me some concern. I spent a couple of days in the military myself, and I understand at the lowest level, if you have, fiscal responsibility, it should translate up to the highest levels. At the age of 27, I had an artillery battery that was multi-million dollars. I'm not a CPA, I'm not an accountant. But we had systems in place, monthly 10% inventories, weekly, monthly, and quarterly budget reconciliations. So at the end of 20 months of command, I will never forget this, there was a $9.35 budget hose for a Hemet truck, and that was the only thing that was missing. And I thought I'd have to write a check for that, but the commander kind of laughed that off. But even as a battalion XO, I continued on to, supervise commanders and make sure we had that reconciliation process, and as a battalion commander as well. Listening to what Mr. Kaufman was talking about, that was part of your evaluation as a commander on the green suiter side, and that went all the way up to division commanders as well as corps commanders. Are we not enforcing a system of property management, fiscal responsibility for our commanders, because in my day as a young captain, you could get relieved if you are, not fiscally responsible. So is that still in place in the military, or has something changed where they're not doing regular inventories, reconciliations? That was part of the monthly USR report that went up to division commanders.
I believe those are still in place, Mr. West, and I don't want to leave you with the impression that there's widespread fiscal irresponsibility in the Department of Defense. But financial statements audits require certain kinds of information be quickly available. Mm-hmm. As I mentioned, we got 140 million transactions a year. For each one of those, I need an invoice, I need a contract, I need a receiving report. We can't produce that information that quickly. And I agree with your suggestion to Mr. Kaufman that has to be, changing that has to be part of the command responsibility. We're going to have to add that to the list of things. But I think we are still out there checking for the stuff that we own. I'll say in property accountability, one of the problems we've seen, because that is one of the high priority areas, counts and locations of our assets. I think we know what we've got generally. We don't always get it into the property, the system of record. And so the auditor goes out there and they look at our system. I mean, they got an Excel spreadsheet over there and they know what they got. But they look at the audit system of record, or the system of record is not there. And so we've got to get commanders to say, hey, you know, cuff records are okay, but you got to get it into the system of record.
Could we institute, like I talked about, the weekly reconciliations or the 10% inventories? Is there some kind of means that we could come up with a 5 to 10% monthly reconciliation process, so at least we can look and say, you know, I'm going to look at this percent of your invoices, not everything within a month, but this percent. So at least we get this sense of urgency and a sense of record keeping and accountability. Because for me, I knew that if the boss above me asked that question and I did not have that signed off 10% inventory reconciliation, that's my job and I'm gone. So can we input something like that, or in place something like that?
Yes, you don't wait till the end of the year. When you're doing this successfully, you are checking as you go along, on a quarterly basis perhaps. And if you're actually under audit, then the auditors are pulling a statistical sample and they're going out to the base and say, okay, show me that information on a perhaps quarterly basis. So as we get to the audit, yes, we'll do just that.
And, sir, if I could add, to echo Mr. Hale, those things are still certainly required within the department. From an auditability perspective, we're looking at ensuring that we've established this referential integrity, so you know what the, if you will, the paper trail is, with strong internal controls and documented processes. That is those are the areas that I think do need the commander's attention, so that we document those processes. Not that it's not being done, it perhaps could be documented more deliberately, so that an auditor could see exactly what processes and internal controls we had in place.
Okay. Well, I tell you, if you get a chance to go over to talk to General Gordon Sullivan, who used to be the Chief of Staff of the Army, that was my division commander at 1st Infantry Division, and he would embarrass you at the monthly USR if he looked at the numbers of your expenditures and you could not tell the story of what you were doing as far as within your brigade is with the money you're spending. So he can probably give you some good lessons learned. Thank you very much. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Ms. Hanabusa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you both for being here. In reading the panel's report, and I believe Ms. McGrath has mentioned this term about 3 times in listening to her testimony, I'd like an explanation of your concept of legacy systems.
Concept of legacy systems.
And it's throughout the report, as you know.
Yeah.
And it's justification for the ERPs because we'll replace so many legacy systems. So what are these legacy systems that we're replacing?
There are thousands of legacy systems within the Department of Defense that perform numerous functions. They were not designed to be an integrated suite of capabilities. Many times there were local decisions made that enable local capability. And a commander had a need to use continue the example, if the commander had a need to perform a business function, he or she had the ability to procure a solution, an IT solution to help solve a local problem. The enterprise resource planning capabilities are integrated, a off-the-shelf integrated suite of capabilities. So it has financial and logistics and personnel modules within the box, if you will, so that you can take a more integrated, holistic approach to your business environment. Most of the military departments in some way, shape, or form are procuring or pursuing an ERP for their future state business environment. In order to successfully do that, you must also retire and eliminate the legacy environment. And there are many challenges associated with that. One is the change management that we've talked about, taking people off the old and onto the new. Another big factor is the data. How are you going to move the data from the past to the present? And what's the best strategy to do that? Because also with the legacy environment, it allows you great flexibility to define the data as you needed to define it very locally. It did not take a corporate perspective. And so there's a lot of, I'll say, opportunities in the implementation of the ERPs, but really to successfully implement those, you must also rationalize the legacy IT environment.
And am I correct in saying that the legacy systems are probably one of your greatest barriers in terms of doing the audits?
Yes.
Now, like for example, Mr. Hale talked about the DEAM system within the Air Force, and there is a statement in here, and I don't know if you agree with it or not, but this is from the panel's report, that they believe that the DEAM system will support $335 million in annual savings after it's been fully deployed by providing real-time visibility into costs and allowing timely reallocation of dollars. So, and it's like for fiscal year 2017 to fiscal year 2021, they are able to reduce unliquidated obligation and accounts receivable by $1.67 billion. So you can imagine, as we're looking at the cutting, that when we see, or when I read something like this, I'm very curious as to, one, whether you agree with these figures, and how would, for example, the Air Force, because you mentioned DEAMS, Mr. Hale, expect to support $335 million in annual savings?
Well, it would be realized in their operation and maintenance budgets when it occurs. I think we'll see some savings. We've got some. The Navy ERP has been around for a while now. I wouldn't say the savings are massive. When you talk to people, they are more excited about the better information and more timely information than they can get than they are about the number of people that they have been able to eliminate, which is one of the ways you save money. But I'm willing to believe we'll see some savings, but it's not the only reason we need these systems.
And you know, in looking at the chart that was an appendix to the report, the ERP system is actually identified as a different system in almost each of the divisions. Like Army has the General Fund Enterprise Business System, Air Force has the DEAM system, Navy has a Navy Enterprise Research Planning System. So I'm just curious, do you believe that in the future we're going to have a problem? We may reduce the legacy to these different ERPs, but then are the ERPs then going to become a problem for us?
So if Mr. Hale doesn't mind, the military department is having three, and those are the financials, predominantly the financial systems that you identified. The importance of the department's ability or an enabler for the department to aggregate the information from those ERPs is the utilization of a standard. The Standard Financial Information Structure is a standard that has been defined and is being implemented within each of those ERPs. So at the end of the day, we can aggregate the data from those different systems using the standards that have been defined. If we did not have those same standards embedded in each of those solutions, then we would not be able to aggregate the data.
So they would be speaking the same language for a layman.
Exactly.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Our inaudibility is interpreted by many of our constituents as opportunities for wholesale theft. If you can't audit the books, how do you know that millions and maybe billions of money is not just being stolen? How can you assure our constituents that that's not now happening?
Sound like my wife, Mr. Chairman. Same question she asked me. First off, financial statement audits aren't really designed to find fraud. They take a very small sample. They're designed to determine whether the statements are materially correct. We have a lot of other procedures to try to eliminate fraud. The main one is two-person control over money. That's fundamental to everything we do. You're not supposed to be dispersing or otherwise handling finances on your own. You have to, a second person needs to be involved so that the only way fraud can occur is collusion. I won't say it's perfect, but I don't think we have wholesale fraud. That's the main reason. Then there are various checks. We have thousands of auditors who are looking over our shoulders, and one of their jobs certainly is to look for fraud. And to try to see if there are any systematic problems. Maybe we aren't doing two-person control at some areas where we should be, so that we can correct that and minimize it. So there's a number of ways we try to prevent fraud, and I wouldn't say the audits are primarily designed, financial statement audits primarily designed to detect fraud.
Thank you for your testimony. Thank you for your work in a very difficult area. Our committee stands in adjournment.